Okay, good morning. I guess it still is for another hour. Thank you, everyone that's joining us. We're at 45, it looks like currently, but it's ticking up by the second. Appreciate everyone joining us. The overall purpose of this meeting was to kind of go over the statistics that we shared earlier in the week. I'm going to go ahead and share that screen with you, which includes the mission statement for the police department. Lola, give me a thumbs up if you can see that. All right, thank you. While we're at it, real quickly, I'd like to introduce Lola Lapo, who's our public safety PIO, and she's going to help facilitate today. I believe what we landed on was, because I'm not a guru with Zoom, I don't claim to be. If you have questions throughout, please throw them in the chat. Lola will feed them back to me. I don't think I can multitask to the point where I can look at both. But in front of you have the statement that we issued last week relative to our mission statement here at UTPD. Includes, of course, a link to today's town hall meeting. But I kind of want to go through the statistics and give you a little background on where we get that. So UTPD is one of very few nationally accredited campus law enforcement agencies. We are accredited nationally through what's called CALEA, that's the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement. CALEA includes numerous standards, nearly 300 standards. We are also accredited through the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators and accredited through the state of Tennessee. In all, UTPD meets at least somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 different law enforcement standards for operation. And the accreditation is something we take seriously, and it's an awful lot of work and frankly financial commitment for us to complete with that. But we think it's very important because it holds us to standards and also it exposes us to best standards and practices throughout our industry. But each year we are assessed, each year part of our standards are assessed by outside assessors that will look at our files, our standards, and our proofs of compliance. So it's not enough for us to say we do A, B, or C. We also have to show proof that we do those things. One of the things we compile is what's called a SIMMERS list or a SIMMERS report. And that's simply a CALEA information management reporting system report, which includes a lot of the information that I have below here relative to a year's worth of our data. So as we go through this, this data is stuff that we put in that SIMMERS report based on our actions throughout the year. So in 2019, UTPD officers conducted 1,977 traffic stops. One of the things we look at is racial disparity between those traffic stops. Is there preferential treatment? So how we break that down is by looking at the race involved in each of our traffic stops and then the enforcement involved, because it would look different if, for instance, if we stopped white people and wrote them tickets at a much less rate than African Americans or other races. Obviously that would show disparity, but as we broke those numbers down, we noted that we cited 47.3% of white drivers and we cited 47.1% of black drivers. Over the course of 2019, we had 8,602 calls for service, and those are anything, folks. Those could be a call to let somebody into a building. It could be a call to check a suspicious person. A lot of those calls, honestly, are self-generated. So a self-generated call would be something like an officer in the middle of the night checking one of our outlying properties just to make sure it's locked up. So those Those equal into that 8,602 calls for service. Particularly, obviously, given the climate today, we're very cognizant of our use of force. I believe I'm proud to say that 99.9% of all of our calls for service involved no use of force. Out of those 8,600 calls for service, 462 arrests were made by our department. And when I say arrests, sometimes that's physical arrest and sometimes that's a criminal summons, which is in the eyes of the law the same thing. If I write a ticket for a criminal infraction to appear in court, that's considered an arrest in our statistics. We also have discretion, which is unlike some other agencies. We do have some discretion to refer certain things to student conduct. Now, there are, for instance, domestic abuse. We're mandated to make arrests in those cases when we have probable cause. So that's not something we can refer to student conduct. But in many cases, we're able to refer things to student conduct in lieu of physical arrest. Obviously, the other person has to be, the person affected has to be a student, or that would not apply. Of those 462 arrests, I need to move something on my desktop so I can read. Of those, 21 involved use of force. 12 of those involved the display of a weapon, but no use of a weapon. So let me explain that a little bit. Give you a very recent example. An officer spotted a car. This was a couple weeks ago. The car was reported stolen. There was a brief chase. The car spun out. The people were stopped. That's what we call routinely a felony traffic stop. So that involved the display of the weapon. But the offenders were compliant and no further use of force was applied. Some agencies would not consider that a use of force, the simple display of a weapon, because there was no actual physical force involved. We do count that as a use of force, so that does go in our statistics. So that accounts for 2.5% of our arrests last year. The other 9 or 1.8% of our arrests did result in some application of force. That could be a pressure point, it could be a wrist lock, something where someone's not compliant and we're forced to use some physical response to go ahead and affect the arrest. I think it's important to note that 349 of those arrested here on campus were not affiliated at all with the University of Tennessee. Think about the 102,000 people at Neyland Stadium on a weekend. It's not uncommon for us to deal with people that have no affiliation with the university other than maybe they're alumni or maybe they're just fans of the team or whatever. But concerts, basketball, football, we have a lot of special events here that attract people that are not necessarily affiliated with the university. And those account, I'm sure, for a great percentage of that 349. Of those 462, 422 people that we arrested last year were white, and that accounts for 91.3%. And 26 were black, which accounts for 5.6%. We track internal affairs complaints. So I'll explain a little bit about internal affairs. That is basically the police investigating the police within. So I have a lieutenant in the police department that is our internal affairs investigator, and as such, he reports directly to me. So when we get complaints, either internally or externally, and I'll try and give you examples of what that means, he investigates those to determine, A, if a crime has been committed, but most often, whether or not personnel violated internal policies. So we had one sustained internal affairs investigation that resulted in a resignation in lieu of termination. It's been pretty publicly reported what happened with our assistant chief last year, and that counts for that case. We had one sustained internal complaint that resulted in a demotion. And just to be transparent, we had an officer that was sleeping on the job. We were able to confirm the fact that he was asleep on the job, and that resulted in a demotion. And then we had one additional demotion and one additional termination related to policy violations. As far as employment actions, we're a fairly small department, so we don't hire, hundreds of people at a time. But over the course of last year, we did hire 11 police officers. Currently, as of today, our demographics are that Utpd is 77% white, compared to 83% of the available workforce in Knox County. In 2019, there were 244 applicants for police officer here at Utpd. Of those applicants, 194 were white, and that accounts for 79.5% of the applicants. 25 were black, that accounts for 8.5%, and 19 were other races, which accounts for 6.4%. We hired 11 officers in the last year. 5 were white, 4 were black, and 2 were other races. I would say, I would submit to you in terms of employment action, post Ferguson, Missouri, I think there was a very strong emphasis within law enforcement as a whole to emphasize diversity within our departments, be more representative of the locations that we police. One of the conundrums I run into, folks, is that nearly every department has taken that philosophy on, and we are actively searching out minority applicants to diversify our departments. The downfall there is that if we're in a geographic region like Knox County, or let's just say East Tennessee, and for instance, an African-American female has a lot of options when it comes to employment in this field. If they're interested in law enforcement, they have a lot of options because everyone is trying to recruit. So with a younger generation, typically they're going to look at the bottom line and they're going to look at starting salaries. And frankly, our starting salary here is not anywhere near the top of our region. So we really tout at Utpd some of the other things we have available to us. The work climate is one that's highly desirable. I have an early background in law enforcement working for a municipal agency. And I can tell you from experience that that can be tough. When I worked for a city, it was literally 8-hour shift, call to call to call to call. And you're meeting everybody on their worst day. People don't typically call the police to tell us about the birth of a new child or anything like that. They're calling us because something was stolen from them, someone hurt them, someone threatened them. And as you can imagine, in many jurisdictions, that's all police are responding to all day, 8, 10, 12 hours a shift. We have a little bit of luxury here in that we're not running our tails off responding to criminal activity. So there's a lot of opportunity we have in terms of community outreach, liaison programs, specializations, and community relations, investigations, and many other things. So that's appealing to some. I hired an African-American female last year who had spent several years here at UT as a resident hall assistant. And she interned with another agency in the area that, by the way, makes a lot more money than we do here. But when we hired her, and I felt very fortunate to hire her because she's very bright, I asked, obviously, why she chose us over someone else. And it was precisely for those reasons I mentioned. She really felt that this was a place where she could take time to make a difference and be part of a community versus being a person that was just going call to call to call. And so those are the statistics that we wanted to point out today. I'm happy to answer questions. Lola's going to kind of facilitate that for me. So Lola, if you want to get us going.
Morning, everybody. Go ahead and send the message via the chat. And we do have a first one from David Talmy, and he says, it looks like the number of citations is roughly equal between white and black. Given that there are many more white students on campus, surely this number is problematic. Should the numbers be reported per capita, white and black, as opposed to raw percentages? This would paint a very different and troublesome picture, which should be addressed.
Okay, I'm going to try and follow that question. I'm not certain. So the Simmers report that I referred to just gives the raw data. So the percentages are something that I pulled out and put down. So written citations, there were 1,607 white drivers stopped last year, and 47.3% of those were actually cited. There were 265 black drivers stopped, and 47.1% were cited. So I'm not sure that I'm following the question precisely. I want to answer it. I'm just not sure that I understand it.
So he just wrote back and said, let's see here, that he didn't see that the percentages were fractions of those pulled over. So we're good.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a great question, and I appreciate making sure that we're clear.
Got it.
I saw Courtney Powell on here, and I know Courtney's got a question. He may not have put it up there, but I know he's got it.
Let's see here. We have one from Alicia Martinez that says, what are the de-escalation tactics and policies that your department has in place? What does training look like for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So de-escalation obviously is a real key term that we hear today. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the history of de-escalation, which is really not a new concept. It's been around a while. But let me paint a picture of how I look in terms of overall policy and procedure. So a couple things. One is that one of the beauties of accreditation in my mind, and by the way, as it pertains to municipalities, other agencies, if I'm a mayor in any city, even though it costs a lot of money, I'm going to make sure that my department is accredited. Can't say as though I've always been the hugest fan of accreditation, but I've grown to very much appreciate it and the accountability that it contains. But the approach we have to de-escalation is that while we do have a de-escalation policy, it really touches every other policy we have. I guess the way I'll explain it is, I've been an ethics instructor, a law enforcement ethics instructor for about 15 years. And one of the first things I learned with police ethics is that you can't just build a policy that talks about the ethics of the department. And you can't just do a training that talks about ethics. You have to make sure that whether you're talking de-escalation, ethics, whatever, that's sprinkled throughout your policy and that it's sprinkled throughout your training. So for instance, in ethics, one of the things that I mandated when I got here was that all of our training, whether it's firearms, less lethal tactics, traffic stops, anything that we have a policy on, and we literally have policy on everything we do, any policy has to have elements of ethics training in it. And then any training that we do relative to those policies has to have an ethics concept in it, a de-escalation concept. Obviously, that's more relevant to some policies than it is to others, but it should be contained where applicable in any of those policies, and certainly within any of the training that we do on those. So the other thing I'll mention, whether it's Active shooter is a good example. So when we train on active shooter, I don't want to be pigeonholed into one training or one concept. So obviously after Virginia Tech, that became a huge issue on college campuses, active shooter response and active shooter training. And that's taken on many iterations over the years. And there are a lot of experts in that field. So what we do as much as possible at Utpd, I can send a couple of officers, for instance, to a de-escalation training. And it's going to cost the agency and therefore the university $1,000 to send 2 officers to this class for 4 or 5 days. But I'm only going to hit 2 officers. So one of the philosophies we have within Utpd is to create experts. So whenever possible, and I segued by talking about active shooter in particular, we send folks to train the trainer courses or instructor level courses, so that, you know, for the same money, I can send people out, then they can come back and facilitate the training within our department. Rather than sending a couple people, now I've got people that can come back here and facilitate the training for the entire department. I hope that answered it.
And we have another question. Someone says, my position works with officers and incidents on campus. How should I report and communicate when I'm not happy with how an officer handles a situation?
Yeah, I think for me, it really boils down to how serious the issue is. I mean, if it's something very egregious, you feel that your civil rights have been violated, or you feel that, you know, certainly if force has been used that you think was inappropriate, that's probably something you need to call and speak directly to internal investigations. If it's, I didn't like the guy's attitude, or I didn't agree with the ticket I received or whatever, you can certainly call our regular phone line at 3114 or 3111 and ask to speak to the shift supervisor. One of the things, you know, I'll tout us for a little bit. Another big concept that we hear a lot about now in law enforcement is body cameras. Folks, we were probably one of the first agencies in the state of Tennessee to adopt body cameras. We've had those for at least 6 years. And I will tell you, quite frankly, that it has quelled a lot of the complaints that I've received over the years. And I think there's 2 facets to that. One, I think people know that we are watching them, they are watching us, and someone else on that body camera is watching that. So we're maybe not so quick to make complaints because we didn't like an outcome. But if there's something to it, we now have the ability to go back and look at that and view it and see if it meets our standards, see if the officer did conduct themselves in the right way or not. We also require through policy periodic review of those. So each shift supervisor is required to look at camera video from their officers, whether they've received complaints or not. They're required to go back and view some of that, just kind of like audit the body camera footage.
How does UTPD interact with our local police, or in what ways do we partner with them? And what are the strengths and areas of improvement, if any, of that partnership? And this is in light of the University of Minnesota's recent decision to cut ties with their local police.
Good question. And I kind of anticipated hearing something about this. I think we have a good relationship with Knoxville PD. I think like many other relationships, I think, well, certainly it can always improve. Familiarity, you know, I think part of the overall national conversation is how overall relationships can be improved if we get to know each other a little bit. And so one of the things we did several years ago, so an officer, when they join us, if they've had no prior experience, they're required to go to a 10-week police academy to become certified in the state of Tennessee. And then we have about a 16-week field training program. So they work with field training officers who evaluate everything from their dress to the way they interact with the public. And they kind of go through a checklist of things that they have to do and conditions they have to meet before they're allowed to operate on their own. We added a couple of years back, we added a couple of weeks to that, and we require our officers to do a ride along with Knoxville PD for 2 weeks prior to coming out and being released on their own. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, I wanted to let them see other conditions and see what other agencies are doing. But mostly I wanted them to be familiar with the Knoxville PD officers. I didn't want the first time one of our officers met a KPD officer to be on the scene of a crime and not know each other. So I wanted some familiarity there. We work an awful lot with them, obviously in our special events, particularly football. We'll have as many as 100 Knoxville PD officers here to help us with that. Special events, most of you that have been here a while know that we've had a couple of incidents with white supremacists on our campus, holding a rally or a speech or whatever. And we've had, rightfully so, a lot of people angry with that and counter protest that. We've been able to manage those things safely without anybody being hurt. And thanks in large part to Knoxville's PD's ability and willingness to help us out and keep those things safe. So I think we have a great relationship. I know personally I'm very good friends with Chief Thomas and have been. I was happy when she was promoted to chief. It can always improve. I think sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect in the middle management area, but the people that are out doing the work, I think are work well together, and certainly I think we have very similar philosophies at the top.
This is a multi-part question. How specifically is UTPD working to counter anti-Black violence, bias, and police brutality? How is UTPD working with Knoxville Police Department to ensure anti-racist policing? And how will UTPD respond to campus protests if they happen in the fall?
Yeah, that's a big question. So, it goes back to implicit bias training that we've conducted. I'm not going to name names here, but two things. One, right after George Floyd's murder, I'll call it what it was, we had a very good meeting within the department to discuss what happened. And I think there was 100% consensus on what happened in that incident. But to revisit our policies, our procedures, the implicit bias training that we've received, and then as a leader, it's incumbent upon me to find ways to illustrate that. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm not going to name the department's name, but it was recently posted in the Nashville Tennessean, a story about a young man, African-American, who was pulled over during the middle of COVID when we were all closed down. He was pulled over in his hometown, and he believed because of the color of his skin. I shared the story with my staff, my supervisory staff, and gave them a homework assignment. I said, review the facts of this case, and I'm going to talk to you individually about whether or not you think the police officer's actions were A-okay, a little suspect, or just downright wrong. And then I was able to circle back with supervisors to say, give me your thoughts. And I think it helped illustrate the implicit bias. So I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of what happened. He's pulled over by the officer because his tag's expired. Now, during the middle of COVID, you all probably were inundated with it seemed like sometimes daily governor's executive orders about different things that were going on during the shutdown. one of which contained language that because the state offices were closed, that we were not going to be writing tickets for expired tags or driver's licenses. Now, he didn't specifically say that we couldn't stop people and remind them that they needed to get those tags renewed, but we certainly weren't doing that because it was a moot point. And my question, and it wasn't answered in the article that I read, was, okay, let's assume the officer did just stop this kid because he wanted to remind him that he needed to get the tag renewed when the government was opened back up. How many white drivers did he do that to? Or was it just one black driver that he happened to pull over because his tag was expired? And so having those constant reminders and conversations, I think, helps people that have good hearts just realize how implicit bias works and how unknowingly, without thinking about it, they may do things that really, you know, here's a young man that's 18 years old. And I think it illustrates another point too that I try and make with my folks. That may be that young man's first and only encounter with law enforcement. And it may be the most routine thing we do in a day, but it's terrifying to him. And I think we have to approach each situation in that manner. I'll give you another example, and I hate to ramble, but it perfectly illustrates something that I was a little, my guys will tell you, miffed with. I'll just say it concerned me. We have, and I understand the reason for it, but we have a tendency when an officer pulls over a car on campus, sometimes you'll see two, maybe sometimes you'll see three cars there. And I've often asked, well, why do we need all these cars there for a stop sign violation? And I understand, well, I'm just making sure he's safe while he writes his ticket or addresses the driver or whatever. But I always ask, well, what do you think that driver thinks? And so long story short, I got a call from a faculty member a couple of years ago, and she was beside herself because she had been pulled over, and then another officer showed up, and then another officer showed up. Now, when I looked into it, the one officer was backing up the other officer, which I get, even if I don't necessarily agree with all the time. But then the third officer was actually looking to talk to the second officer and knew that he was on the traffic stop. So he just stopped by there to tell him that they were going to go to lunch wherever. But I had to remind my folks, what do you think that person in that car feels when a second officer and then a third officer shows up? And she's thinking, my God, all I did was ran a stop sign. So those are just helpful reminders as we move along that I don't have to as constantly remind our folks as I used to, but things that I have to do to facilitate discussion and thought.
And then the second part of that, how will UTPD respond to campus protests if they were to happen this fall?
Yeah, depending on a presidential election, I think that could be very interesting. And something that, by the way, we've already started to discuss because frankly, after the last presidential election, I was caught a little bit unaware. So it's certainly something we're discussing, but we will respond to it in the same manner that we respond to any other protest. It's America, and people are free to express their thoughts and feelings as long as they do so peacefully. We're just there to make sure that things are peaceful. I guess you might consider me a bit of a constitutionalist police chief in that I'm here to enforce the law and nothing more, and to keep people safe. If people are demonstrating peacefully and they're not doing anything that violates a law or someone else's rights, I'm just there to make sure it stays peaceful.
Okay, another question says, okay, Knox County Sheriff's Office is one of the few Tennessee agencies that is an ICE partner to enforce immigration law.
Yeah.
This partnership is controversial. How, if any, is UTPD involved in immigration enforcement?
Not at all.
And then how do you train officers to respond to mental health crises incidents? And what percentage of calls do we receive that are related to those incidents?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but and remind me, Lola. But let me back up because that was a little hasty. My response, not at all. One of the unique things about working on a campus, and by the way, you know, I mentioned early on that I'd started out in municipal law enforcement, and in full disclosure, the reason I went to a campus now 20 some years ago was to finish up my degree. But I'll tell you, one of the unique reasons I stayed working at a campus was because I enjoyed the diversity of a campus. There's not too many other places you can live and work where you meet people from literally every background you can imagine. And I certainly hope that every officer that works for me values that as much as I do. So now let me switch gears and move to the other question. So repeat it to me again, Lola.
Sure. How do you train officers to respond to mental health crisis incidents? And what percentage of our calls are related to mental health crisis incidents?
Okay. Well, I'm not trying to be facetious here, but I would say that almost every call we respond to involves some amount of mental health crisis. As I said earlier, most any time we're responding to a call for service, it's somebody's having a bad day. Some worse than others. I don't know that I could break it down into percentages, but I will tell you definitively over the years that I've been doing this work, we've seen more and more in terms of mental health issues. And I've conducted some research, but I will tell you it's probably one of the biggest issues in my mind as a police chief that we face today in law enforcement is the plethora of mental health issues and the lack of mental health services in our country. And this started many, many years ago when the government started to defund state, local, federal government started to defund mental health services back in the early 80s at least, to the point now where look at how many mental health facilities have closed over the years, and it's very, very difficult to work with. One of the things when I got here, and I was a bit embarrassed to admit this when I got here, the National Association for National Association, NAMI, and it escapes me right now, Mental Health Alliance, many, many years ago developed what's called crisis intervention training. And by the way, this started here in Tennessee and Memphis as a collective research and training program related to police interacting with people in mental health crisis. I saw Ashley Blamey on here. She can text you what NAMI stands for. It just escapes me right now. But when I got here to UTPD, only one of our officers had been through CIT training. And so I said, that's unacceptable. There are two schools of thought. There are those chiefs that believe every officer should be trained in CIT. And I used to be one of those. And then there are some that say you need to have quite a few of your officers trained in CIT, but it's not necessary for every officer. And I'm probably there at this point. But we've got probably half of our staff have been through CIT. I was asked recently, you know, about a program that I had started here that I was very proud of. Several years back, I attended a presentation from a gentleman in North Carolina who obviously, and this was a few years ago, we had been involved in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan for years. And he worked in a town that bordered a large military base. And he started to realize that there were real mental health issues, in particular to our veterans. And veterans are a tough nut to crack. I am one. they have unique issues and a unique baggage that they pick up during their military service, and particularly those of us that have served in conflict. And we're really hesitant to listen to people who haven't been there and done that. So he had developed on his own a program that took all of CIT, but really molded it for CIT in particular with veterans. And so it's called the Veteran CIT program. Well, I knew that, you know, the University of Tennessee really touted itself as a veterans friendly university. I have several veterans on the force here, and we have a large campus population of veterans, many of whom have been in combat and seen a lot of traumatic things. Anecdotally, at the same time, literally, a couple of my officers told me about a case where there was some gunfire down on the Cumberland Avenue one night, and they found one of our veteran students literally prone underneath of a vehicle, having some flashbacks. Fortunately, both of the officers that were on the scene were both veterans, and they were able to talk to him in his own language and get him out from underneath the car and get him some help and get him home. But those things happened about the same time, and I saw the need for enhancing that or creating a program here. So I sent 2 officers, again, using an earlier illustration. I sent 2 officers to North Carolina to become trainers in the Veteran CIT program, and we were able to institute that program internally. We're the only campus police department in the country that I'm aware of that has a Veteran CIT program. So every officer that's part of that program has to be trained through CIT, the traditional CIT that I've spoken of, and be a veteran. And then they go through basically an enhanced veterans level CIT program internally, and then they're qualified to be a veteran CIT. We give them a little pin to put on their uniform to identify them as veterans and CIT officers.
I was just going to say, so NAMI, somebody said, thank you. It's the National Association of Mental Illness.
Yes. And so a little bit more about CIT is that it's a program, it's run through Helen Ross McNabb locally. And it really, it spends a full week with the officers. They spend a full week in the class, and they work with folks with mental health illnesses and the collective, what's left of the collective mental health services within the county. And it's a way to recognize when people are in mental health crisis and redirect. You know, for many years, it's unfortunate. It's actually, it should be criminal. The fact that we had no repercussion with people in mental health crisis other than throw them in jail. And that really isn't serving them and isn't serving the public. This gives them the ability to know, and personally, the people that are available to help people that are in mental health crisis, how to interact with a person that's in mental health crisis, because you learn either the hard way or you learn through training that there are certain ways to interact with people that can set them off and other ways that can deconflict or de-escalate the situation. So CIT in and of itself is really nothing more, in my mind, than a de-escalation tool.
What steps will you take as chief to be proactive in future events? And will UTPD partner with the Vice Chancellor of Diversity to facilitate this?
Absolutely, and we have and will continue to as much as we can. Here's the unfortunate fact. And having been a chief now in 2 different institutions and for several years, it's unfortunate that it takes George Floyd's murder for us to have these conversations. It's unfortunate that it takes Ferguson for us to have these conversations. And we have them, and they're robust, but after time they wane. And that's unfortunate. One of the things that I think, do a pretty good job of, but we can certainly be better, is we have a fairly robust liaison program. So we have people that liaison with our Pride Center. We have people that liaison with all different organizations on our campus, but not everyone. We need to be better. We need to conduct more those liaison programs. For instance, one of the things I would really like to do is create, it's referred to in my industry as adopt a cop, but I would love to have a point in time where each of the residence halls had a cop that's their cop, that has dinner with them once a month or every few weeks, that talks to them about what's going on, and, you know, why do you guys do this, and can, you know, have a conversation like we're having right now. And we have those, but I'd like to have one in every residence hall. And I would like any organization that wanted to partner up for something like that to reach out and try and make that happen.
Going back to the Veteran CIT program, is the Veteran CIT program appropriate for Veterans Resource Center staff, and have they been trained?
No, they're very aware of it, and they've helped us facilitate some of the training. In fact, part of that training involved having actual veterans come in and talk about their unique issues and so forth to help us facilitate the training. But it's really applicable to police officers and our response to, in particular, veterans in mental health crisis. So it's more a police tool, again, to help with de-escalation and other issues, versus a tool that's really applicable to a staff member that deals with veterans. I'm sure some of the concepts probably could go across those lines, but it's really more of a police-centric training.
Is there a relationship between campus counseling services and the Utpd? And do they ever work together, and if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. So in many ways, actually, a lot of referrals are made from the police department to the mental health services here on campus. It's certainly something we know of and can refer when we're dealing with a student who may be depressed or whatever. It's certainly something that we know we can reach out to that center. 974 Help is a referral service that we use often. It can be referred through student conduct. We have representation on the campus behavioral threat team and the campus case management team, which reviews cases involving students that may be suffering from mental health crisis or have committed some kind of crime, or maybe maybe deemed to be a threat to the campus. And certainly having folks within that profession in the same room with us. I've dealt with a lot of people over the years that I thought had a problem, but it's always nice when I have a trained psychologist or psychiatrist in the same room that can either, redirect the conversation or confirm my thoughts or whatever. But we have a strong relationship, I would say, with mental health, with student health, a lot of folks in that. We're very collaborative. I think one of the things you'll see different about campus law enforcement from traditional law enforcement is that overall, I would say we're very much more integrated with our community, and it's a unique community than a lot of other agencies. And some of it has to do with the fact that some other agencies are truly overwhelmed just trying to keep their heads above water. Fortunately, we don't have the amount of crime on campus that causes that for us. We were able to outreach and do a little more proactive community policing versus your traditional law enforcement agencies.
Several specific CIT trainings have been referenced. As only a few officers are able to attend each training, is there anything done formally to pass that information on to other officers? Yeah,
absolutely. So we maintain a CIT liaison officer here who helps facilitate who still needs the training. And part of our annual retraining includes mental health awareness. And we typically, rather than rely on, say, an internal CIT officer to facilitate that, we'll actually get somebody from student health, the mental health side, or the Helen Ross McNabb Center, somebody like that, an expert, to actually come in and facilitate those annual trainings for us versus trying to do that internally.
Received a couple of inquiries about will there be a town hall with Utpd specifically for students or with students and families this fall? with concerns of COVID and this, we can imagine there will also be some of the safety concerns that they want to discuss.
Yeah, I think there'll be, so I sit on the Emergency Operations Center for the university, which is really doing the collective work on reopening the university. And I can tell you definitively, there's a lot of work being done right now to reimagine how we open in the fall, and a lot of the training and services that need to be available and in place before we open. But I know I and my staff are always ready to dialogue with folks. It's much better to have this kind of dialogue than it is to sit back and wait and see what comes out. I meet almost annually with SGA, other student groups. You know, I think the easiest thing to do is hit Lola up at, Lola, give me your email address.
It's UTPD PIO, so UT Police Department Public Information Officer at utk.edu.
Yeah, so if there's anything going on that you'd like representation at, even if it's just, hey, we'd just like to have an officer there in case some question comes up, we're happy to try and facilitate that.
Another question about the Tennessee State House Bill 2102, which, if passed, will mandate all Tennessee universities to allow on-campus gun carry. Your thoughts on this, specifically particularly since the SGA passed a bill on campus saying the students don't want guns on campus?
Yeah. Well, that got sent to committee. That bill actually got sent to committee. So the soonest, it's not going to come back up this year for vote. It went to the Senate, I think, Education Committee for study. So it's not a bill that's going to pass this legislative session, but it's certainly up there. It already passed through the House. You know, I think in all this that's going on in our country today, and this may be a simplistic answer, but I think all of this, including a student carry bill, highly illustrate the need for people to speak with their elected officials. I'm in a unique position that I'm the vice president for the Tennessee Police Chiefs Association. I'll be president in August. I will move into the president's leadership role. I often communicate with our elected officials as a necessity in that position, but I do so mostly on behalf of that association and a little bit on behalf of my position here at the university. But I'm careful because we have our own governmental relations folks here at the university that I don't really cross over into that as much as representing the police chiefs across our state. That passed through the House. It flied through the House. I'm told that the Senate will be a much harder sell, and that likely, I'm told, likely will not go through the Senate. But if the right people are singing in their ears and everyone else is mute on the subject, it may go through. So if you are adamantly opposed to that, they need to hear more. You know, they hear from SGA and they hear probably from the university all the time, but they need to hear from other people, your parents, you, everybody needs to be chiming in. They need to hear loud and clear that that's something that we don't want here. On the other hand, if it does go through, we will deal with it. You know, we dealt with the faculty staff carry, and I'm knocking on wood right now. We haven't seen anything bad come of that, but I'm not naive. The more guns we have on campus, I think the more chances that we're going to have something bad happen, and we don't need that.
So I'm going to ask two questions. They were from two different people, but they are similar.
Okay.
If there are protests on campus in the fall, what kind of uniform gear will the officers plan to wear? From what I've seen on TV, the military police gear might escalate an otherwise peaceful protest. And then add into that, will KPD be part of the response should there be protests on campus?
Okay, so that's a big question. We have riot gear. It's almost kind of mandated across our industry. And I will just give you my 2 cents on that. It's like any other tool we have. It's only good if you have it available. If things really go south, worst case scenario, things really go south, it's too late to go back to the car or back to the office in the closet and pull that gear out. Now, we've had many protests, many demonstrations on our campus, and we've never had the need to do that. But it really depends on the severity of the issue, I guess is the bottom line. If it's protest is a big word. I've seen a lot of protests in the last couple of weeks that were good protests with maybe a few knuckleheads involved in that protest. But then I've seen some that were really just riots. And, sending me out in my current uniform in the middle of a riot is not a good solution. My wife wouldn't like that. My employer wouldn't like that. My health insurance provider definitely would not like that. On the other hand, sending someone in riot gear out in the middle of a peaceful protest probably doesn't look good either. So I have to use good judgment when those orders are made. Yes, if it's a large protest and we anticipate, because without letting a lot out, there are a lot of things we monitor when we know we have a protest. So social media is one big one. And I can tell you definitively, in probably every protest we've had here in Knoxville for the last several years, there have been elements of people out there that are looking to take an opportunity to, for lack of a better word, stir things up. And those are the people we're worried about. I'm not worried about the folks that really want to go out and exercise their free speech rights. I'm worried about the people that want to take advantage of that and turn it into something else. And I have to be prepared for that. So I know that's a long-winded answer, and I know it's probably not a great answer for some, but we have the tools that we need to do our job safely and effectively. But we always approach every situation using, if it involves force, we will use the minimal amount of force to do our jobs. And that's mandated by our policy, our training, and everything else.
We have a couple of more minutes, so we'll do a couple more questions. One says, what role do you see the police department having in future conversations on Black Lives Matter?
I'm certainly willing as the chief to have any conversation anyone wants to have. And if I'm not available to make sure that we have personnel that represent the department that can do so, I have a good administrative staff who gets it, and we're all willing to have those conversations. We need to be invited, quite frankly. Sometimes I see things that go on here and think, well, I would have been happy to be involved in that conversation had I known about it. But I hope that no one thinks that we're on an island here, that we don't want to interact or converse about these issues. That the more we can communicate, I think the better off we are. The first time you see me is in the middle of some crisis, then I think we've all failed to a certain extent.
And then one last question, doubling back to the statistics you shared earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The use of force situations, the 21 you mentioned, did they end up?
I'm sorry?
Based on the statistics, how did the use of force situations end up? Or what were the outcomes of those?
Yeah. So all we're getting at there is that, so I'm going to use the 9 instead of the total of 21. The 9 involved actual application of force. So we didn't, no one ended up in the hospital. No one, no one was killed. It's just some people, unfortunately. So I'll give you an example. A guy that was really probably in some kind of mental health crisis, although I tend to think it was drug induced, in the library. And this was a couple of years ago. And I just remember because I watched about 4 different body camera videos. He was out of it, and he was physically lunging at officers. And this was a big guy. He was basically provoking them to the point where one of the officers ended up tasing the guy. And that ended it. It hurt. I could hear him. He felt it, but when the shock wore off, he didn't want any more to do with it. He went peacefully at that point. You know, we hope things don't ever get to that point. We hope that we can use good verbal skills to de-escalate situations and keep them from getting to that point. But sometimes we have to be prepared to do those things to effect arrest or to keep people safe. And we fall back on training and our use of force policies to do that.
We are about out of time. I just want to remind you, if you have other questions after we're done, email is utpdpio@utk.edu. I would love to continue the conversation. And Chief, do you have any final words?
No, I appreciate everyone that took the time to sit in and ask questions. They're all very valid. I think right now is a very unique time in my job. But I think the possibility exists that we can only go up from here. Things certainly couldn't get a whole lot worse. So I think having conversations like this across the nation are very necessary, and I hope that they continue. So please invite us. If you have a conversation, you want one of us there, we're happy to do that.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Hope you have a good afternoon.